you could make a little smooching sound.
So now we're live on
Yeah.
Smoochy Sound. What? Did I what?
Did you? I saw the little mute go on your under your name there, so I was wondering if you made a little.
Oh, no, not intentionally. I think maybe it might have just muted me because I wasn't talking or something for so long.
Are you lying again? You could be lying. You
I
know.
might be lying again. I might be lying a lot. That's what I do. For those who don't know and who are listening to this podcast for the first time, what I do, and I'm Jason. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, then you don't necessarily know that. And Matt, you should talk. Say I'm Matt. That way, people can associate a voice with a name.
I'm Matt. That way, people can associate a voice with the name.
Excellent. You have not drunk enough beer yet. That is clear. If you're able to remember that whole sentence.
I was working on it while you were saying it. I was like, I don't remember this whole thing.
Should have kept on going. But wow, I don't remember where we were going. But this is Back of the Bullpen. This is the live part, except there are no viewers. That means the only people hearing this are going to hear it recording on recording. And we haven't done this in about 2 weeks, I think. Scheduling, but we're definitely going to talk about Jared Cosart and gambling. We're hopefully going to talk about more than one topic, and if we do, we'll talk about Oscar Taveras and the Cardinals patch. We're going to go there. We're going to do some controversy. We're going to have some hot takes. And after we get done putting those hot takes in your face, we will ponder talking about Hector Oliveira and or Chris Bryant. So stick around for all of that. We may not get there. We try to pile up as many topics as we can and then never get to them. That's the method of this podcast.
It's called the Back of the Bullpen method.
Yes, that's why we're at the back again, as we've noted before, of the bullpen and not the front.
You wouldn't want us at the front. That would be
no, you definitely don't. We are the injury replacement middle relievers. We're normally the long man. In so many ways. But wait, where's my sound effect? I need to boom boom that.
You got it?
No, I don't have it. Where is it? Where are my effects?
Oh, I see. Jason has added Google effects. Uh-oh.
Yeah, downloading the app. Just pretend you're not. None of this is happening.
I'm really looking forward to talking about these topics with you, Jason.
Yeah. So in so many ways. There we go.
Yay! Oh, I should have had the applause one ready.
Really should have queued that up, I think. But in any event, okay. So Jared Cosart. Jared. He was traded last year from the Astros to the Marlins, from one shit franchise to another, and presumably in order to escape said shitty franchises, he apparently likes to DM gambling direct message for those who aren't on Twitter. I doubt there are any listeners who aren't on Twitter, but direct message gambling experts on Twitter and ask them, I don't know, how to make some bets or whatever. Some gambling expert, although a relatively anonymous one, I don't think there was a real name on his account, so you have to take all of this with a gigantic grain of salt, posted a supposed DM conversation between a friend of his and Cosart. So this is not even this is like fourth hand at this point. Plus, there's all those tools out there to make up fake tweets, make up fake IM conversations. It's really not hard to fake something like this. However, after it went public, Jared Cosart deleted his account. So that's a little bit, that's sort of why were you running from the cops if you didn't do anything wrong? Which doesn't work for everybody, but Jared Cosart's a white guy, so it does work for him. He's got nothing to fear from the cops. So he deleted his account, apparently came back with an account that may or may not have been his, and was I don't know, just denied that, said he got hacked, but that maybe this was a fake account saying that the old Jared Cosart account got hacked. It's all very unclear. What is clear is that MLB is investigating what Cosart's relation to making large bets on things is. It is not illegal. Illegal. It is not against baseball rules to gamble. Period. Even on other sports, it is against baseball rules to gamble on baseball. Um, Actually, that what's a little unclear on any baseball game. Apparently, you can't, like, by the text of the rule, you can't even gamble on college baseball or high school baseball because it doesn't say upon any major league game or minor league or professional game. It just says upon any baseball game. So don't go gambling on your kids' little league games if you're a professional player listening to this. Do you think we have any professional listeners?
I would imagine we only have professional listeners.
We are professional listeners.
Yeah.
But so I guess I mean there's not. We'll just have to wait and see what's going to happen with Kosar. It seems likely that he's not dumb enough to actually bet on baseball. He can put as much money as he wants on the NBA and on hockey and whatever else he's a fan of. This has come to nothing, but it's sort of relevant because Pete Rose apparently recently officially applied. I don't know what that means, but officially applied for reinstatement to baseball. So he was banned for life for gambling on baseball. And so now he wants to come back, and I think he probably sees an opportunity because Bud Selig is gone.
Yeah.
And Bud Selig's longtime lieutenant, who probably, concurred with everything Bud Selig ever did, is now in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So he somehow thinks he's got a better chance with Rob Manfred.
He can't have a worse chance. There was no way Selig was letting him back in.
What's that?
He said he can't have a worse chance.
That's a good point. Even if he goes from 0 to 0, it isn't a worse chance. You may as well. I mean, what does it cost him? I mean, he's not doing anything.
Right.
He can fill out a form or have his lawyer fill out a form and say, I want in. So I guess none of this is actually worthy of discussion in terms of the individuals. Although I guess the Pete Rose thing. You about Pete Rose. Would you, if you were Rob Manfred, reinstate Pete Rose?
No, I wouldn't, and I don't understand people who say that they would. He very clearly did what he's accused of doing. He was sentenced, to an appropriate, use this word twice in the same sentence. He was sentenced to an appropriate sentence, I don't get what baseball has to gain by bringing Pete Rose back. I get why Pete Rose wants to come back, but I don't understand why. Why would you go? Oh well, it's been 20 years or whatever, 30 years. It's time to bring all the admitted gamblers back into the fold. It's just it's strange. I mean, I think just because time has passed doesn't lessen the what he did. So no, I wouldn't let him back in.
Would you be in favor of a rule? Like, would you be in favor of the Hall of Fame saying we don't care who's banned and who's not banned? We're going to evaluate Pete Rose on the merits of his career before he got banned, and same for Joe Jackson and anybody else. Like, would you be okay with the Hall of Fame divorcing their eligibility criteria from who's been banned from baseball?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean the Hall of Fame isn't baseball. That's not. We often tie those two things together, but they're actually separate institutions. And what the Hall of Fame doesn't have any effect on what baseball, how baseball is played on the field, and that's really my main concern. I don't want to have. I mean, the most important thing about baseball is its integrity. Without that, you don't really have anything else. If people don't believe the games are for real, that the players are really trying, that everything is on the up and up, then there's a real problem that takes place. So I don't see how you can have any leniency, from the standpoint of baseball. From the standpoint of the Hall of Fame, whatever. Make all the plaques you want. That's fine, and it does, and maybe I'm missing something, but I don't feel like it impacts anything on the field. Am I wrong about that? Jason?
Uh, my wife has come in and again like distracted me. So what was the question at the end? I heard you right up until the end.
Oh, what did I say? I don't think I've missed anything, but I mean, does putting Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, does that do anything to promote gambling in baseball?
No, I don't.
'Cause I don't see that it does, and so that's why I
Yeah,
disagree with you.
I don't think it. Well, even I mean, I guess the maybe the I think it. I would say no. It doesn't promote it. And the question would be whether um, banning, abiding by the ban, maybe helps, create an incentive not to do it. But so few people. I mean, Jared Cosart is not a Hall of Famer. Like we can say that right now that
Not
he's
yet.
not going to make the Hall of Fame, and he has to know that if he's realistic. So a very very tiny. This would only dissuade the possibility of not making the Hall of Fame would only dissuade a very 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 tiny number of players. And so yeah, it doesn't seem likely to have any effect Um, on it. It's not a stamp of, and well, I mean, this is the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame museum status. Like, there's no reason they couldn't put on his plaque that he was banned from baseball for
Yeah.
gambling. That he was a sort of well-regarded, as far as I understand, manager. And that he is not allowed to manage anymore. He's not
Yeah.
allowed to coach. He's not allowed to be a general manager. Maybe he'd be a brilliant general manager. It seems unlikely, but maybe he would be. He can't be an ambassador in those weird retired player positions. He can't do all that stuff. They could say that on his plaque, and anybody going to the museum. I mean, there's you and I are old enough that I don't actually remember Pete Rose all like in terms of as a manager and whatever, but Pete Rose is was sort of close enough to contemporary when I was a kid that like I understood who he was. Kids now are just going to know Pete Rose as the guy who does weird commercials about not being in the hall, and applying for reinstatement, and he's kind of goofy, and he's got a bad haircut, and like they're not necessarily going to have that connection with Pete Rose, and so it may be almost better to remind because nobody else has been banned for gambling since Pete Rose. So it may be almost better to put him in the Hall of Fame, put that on the plaque, and remind people that yes, he has the most hits of anybody ever, but remember what gambling gets you. So maybe it's actually an argument for putting him in the Hall of Fame and on that sort of museum theory.
I don't think it would hurt. Yeah. So I don't know that I see it as a pro argument, but I don't see it as an anti either. I think yeah, I don't think it would have an impact either way. So and I'm all for historical accuracy in on the plaques and at the museum. I mean, I think that's a real criticism of of a bad museum, or a real telltale sign of a bad museum is historical inaccuracy. Glossing over part of history that is unfortunate that we might want to pretend it. But yeah, I think if you put Rose in there, you've got to put something on, either on his plaque or somewhere in there about about what he did and why he's not still not welcome as at major league ballparks anymore.
That's an interesting point about the historical accuracy because particularly sort of historical type museums, somebody had to care enough about the subject to found the museum, right?
Right.
And so the difficulty is balancing between telling the story that of whatever it is that the museum's about, and like your sort of boosterism.
Right.
The sort of museum that comes to mind is the National, it's something like the Atomic Energy Museum in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
And it's kind of about the Nevada test site, the atomic energy test site. But it's very like, it's very like fuck those Russians, and like, it's the communism stuff. I'm pretty, if I remember right, it literally says in the museum that like without this test site, not literally. It practically says in the museum that without this test site, we would have been overrun by communist Russia, which was trying to spread its totalitarian regime throughout the world. I'm pretty sure there's an early like plaque in the museum that basically says that. And it's like, okay, so that's not exactly an even-handed approach to the history here. Like, and it does touch on like, all these scientists who worked there all got cancer and died, and it sucked. But it kind of like, but they were heroes for fighting communism,
Right.
and the Baseball Hall of Fame can probably fall into that a little bit, but it's hard because they did. It's not just it wasn't dispassionate people who founded the Hall of Fame or who run the Hall of Fame now. It's baseball fans who want to see baseball continue and thrive and want to celebrate the history, and so that becomes very hard to acknowledge the negative side. I mean, it's like the way that baseball talks about Jackie Robinson acknowledges the racism of the prior regime, but kind of downplays it. I feel like, and instead sort of talks about Jackie Robinson himself, makes it very much Jackie, 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 Jackie,
Mhm.
and doesn't talk so much. Doesn't talk. I mean, the nobody on like the official, on Jackie Robinson Day every year or whatever, talks about was it Tom Yawkey, the owner of the Red Sox, who just sort of made whoever it was with the Red Sox that made them the last by like 5 years to integrate.
Mhm.
Nobody doesn't talk about how it's not like Jackie Robinson came in and it was like, oh, glory be, now it's a representative sport.
Right.
He was the first, and he was one of a very tiny minority for a long time, because a lot of owners were not enlightened, and some owners were afraid and caving to public pressure, and other owners were just flat out racist, and didn't want a black player on their team. But that's kind of swept under the rug, and it's more like, oh, those owners in the 1920s, they were racist. But by the 50s, Jackie Robinson came along and made everybody not racist.
Right.
And,
Right.
so that kind of message is, I think, some maybe in danger of being replicated by the sort of museum of the sport, because it doesn't adhere to necessarily a strict boundary of between history and boosterism.
No, I think that's a great point. And I mean, I haven't been to the Hall of Fame in a long time. I've been there 2 or 3 times. So maybe they have had an exhibit that has, dealt with the history of gambling in the sport, which is considerable, especially like you said back in the 20s. Well, actually, probably a little before that. I think things probably took or at least slowed down a little bit after the Black Sox scandal. Um, but the point is, maybe they have talked about that. I don't actually know. I shouldn't condemn them for not having an exhibit and talking about that part of their past when I don't know whether or not they've done it.
Right.
But but they should do it. I think that would be actually a terrific exhibit. Um, and with the access that they have, the archives that they have access to, I'm sure they could do an amazing and enlightening job of that sort of sorted part, and they could probably tell a positive story too. This is how things started, and here's where we are now. We haven't had any problems other than you know silly bowl cut single guy for
Yeah.
like 50 years
Yeah.
or
I
whatever.
mean, where we are now is basically that everybody makes too much money to be bothered.
Exactly. Yeah, I
You're
mean,
going to go to the minimum salary guy is making $500,000,
right.
and even after taxes and everything else, he's making low six figures net, and there's just not enough money on any given random regular season baseball game to, uh, particularly since you either need the starting pitcher, the manager, or you need a conspiracy like the Black Sox. You need multiple guys pitching in to help. Because you can't. It's if you're a point guard, if you're a quarterback, if you're a long snapper, actually,
Yeah.
like a weird guy who might have an outsized effect. Your butt can go a long way in terms of throwing a game, but you're like, hey, left fielder, go throw that game. It's like, well, I'll strike out as many times as I can, but like that's the best I can do.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to afford to get the center fielder and the pitcher and the catcher and the shortstop.
Yeah, and so you need all of them. You can't even afford one,
Yeah.
frankly. And particularly, they're giving up so much if they get caught. There seems like, MLB's investigation unit is these days is probably such that they would get caught. Now it's entirely possible. Now, see, on the other hand, there is still match fixing in tennis. But it's kind of at the lower levels. It's almost if like you see minor leaguers throwing games. You could see minor leaguers throwing games because they're not paid anything. They're paid sub minimum wage. But just
Anyone
I
really?
don't think there's any gambling on AA games. So on that side, there's no demand, and then on the other side, there's too much. The money is just too big inside the game to have it affected outside the game.
I think that's a great point. I mean, the success of the Major League Baseball Players Union has really eliminated gambling from the game. I mean, I guess you could.
To be fair, of the owners themselves as well. I mean, the union has succeeded in getting for the players a larger piece of the pie, but the owners have, far outstripped inflation in terms of growing that pie. These team valuations and their revenues, translate 1920s dollars to 2015. That's not what these teams are making. These teams are making many multiples more than that. So there's just so much more money in the game because of the TV they've managed to develop and just all the marketing they've done over the years as sort of America's game and everything else. And we I think the hardcore people like us complain about that marketing sometimes and complain about I don't know, it's just things, but it's not, and it doesn't make as much as football. And we're like, but football sucks. Baseball's awesome. You don't think that, but some of us do. And baseball should be better than football. And but regardless of where baseball ranks in the football, basketball, baseball pantheon, the fact is that baseball is making billions of dollars, and that's a credit to the business. So.
Yeah,
You can't really take that away.
No, absolutely. I mean, anytime you can give a guy, that from another country who's never played in the system, who people don't really know all that much about, and on top of that might be injured, $60 million. I think you're doing pretty well as a sport.
Yeah. So I think you alluded to it. Well, you more than alluded to it. You talked about that sort of integrity is pretty much, is all the game has. If you can't trust that this is an honest competition between two teams that are trying their hardest, sort of putting aside questions of toward the end of the season, maybe you're worrying more about getting players, breaking players in, getting them experience, things like that. Still, in the end, the players on the field are trying their hardest to win, and there's a sense in which it doesn't matter that the manager or the general manager is tanking a little bit in September because that's kind of out in the open. Nobody has any illusions about what the Astros have been doing in September. We're doing in September 2013. When some random rookie started a game rather than a guy who is probably technically 5% better than him. that's on the up and up. That's, everybody knows it. They won't fully admit it, but it's kind of an unspoken thing. So given that, and I just kind of want to make that explicit because, again, because Pete Rose, nobody's done what Pete Rose did in 40 years. I think that can get a little lost, and I'm with you that that is basically the worst thing you can do, kind of within the game. And I guess I guess that leads to the question: can you think of anything? Is there anything that you think deserves a worse punishment, or is there anything else that you think deserves uh, also banned for life from baseball besides gambling on games?
Um, I don't know. That's a good question. I honestly would have to think a little more about it than I probably have time here to do. Um,
Well, let me throw something at you. What about sort of? I mean, there's already a fair amount of violence within the game, but there's kind of a sanctioned amount of violence.
right.
Like throwing at a guy gets you a five game suspension or whatever. But what
Right.
about just sort of like just ridiculous violence, like actually trying to choke a guy to death on the field, something like that?
I don't. I don't know. My guess is that that wouldn't um, merit. I mean, if you got into a fight on the field, if there were two teams fighting, and one guy grabbed another guy's neck and started really squeezing, um, you'd have to think that he would be suspended. But I doubt that it would be for life, right? I mean, that sounds. I mean, even for that sounds excessive. I mean, I suppose if he killed him, then maybe you're talking about. I mean, at that point, it almost doesn't make a difference. The guy is going to be tried for murder, and it
But
almost
you might
doesn't.
still put him in the Hall of Fame. I mean, what if Albert Pujols killed somebody when he's like 45? Does
Oh
he get
well,
does
yeah,
he
if he
get
goes
does
to
he
the
get
hall.
banned and therefore not in the Hall of Fame, or does he just go to jail and therefore get to be in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, either way, you would think that, at least from my standpoint, as we talked about before, he wouldn't play baseball again, and if he got into the Hall of Fame anyway, that'd be fine with me. So, um, you know, you know, I don't know. I don't really want to come out and say, yeah, he put murderers in the Hall of Fame, but but I'm almost about to say it.
Yeah,
Good job,
yeah.
Jason.
It's well, that's why it's interesting. I mean, there comes a point where you might have to throw a guy out for safety. Like just the safety of other players, just the same way as any workplace, right? I mean, gambling is kind of a weird thing because it doesn't really have an equivalent in your regular job. But if there's a guy around your job who has attacked, three different people, maybe that's not the right analogy because now I'm going into repeating. But if there's a guy around your job who just attacks somebody,
Yeah,
um, that's always a question: is do you suspend them and hope they rehabilitate? Do you try to help, and maybe given the right workplace and the right environment, try to help them rehabilitate through employee assistance programs and things like that, referrals to psychiatrists? Or do you just fire them? And then what if they do it again? So if you get into maybe repeated violence and there's an actual safety issue, I think that might be a reason to throw a guy out of baseball. Although even then, I feel like if they, do go to some kind of, rigorous therapy, maybe even medication, whatever, and can show that they've got
yeah,
it under control, and say they're young enough that it's been like 3 or 4 years of this, almost like apply um,
like
Josh Hamilton, right? I
yeah,
mean, who started using drugs and got into addiction issues, or probably had addiction issues all along, and 5 years later, basically had put himself in a, or maybe longer than that, put himself finally in a position where he could play baseball. Like, imagine that is a guy who had such an anger and violence problem that he needed the kind of help that Josh Hamilton needed, and he got that kind of help. I wouldn't necessarily be averse to reinstating him, um, with the sort of caveat that there's maybe nothing quite like competing in sports in terms of your adrenaline, in terms of, like, how you pump yourself up. So I don't know that you could ever prove, oh, I haven't attacked anybody on the street in the last 5 years. Well, I mean, what about the next time you get hit with a pitch? You
right.
know,
Yeah.
what about the next time your teammates all run out there and fight? What are you going to do in the middle of that scrum? Even if you weren't personally involved, like, are you going to be able to keep your cool? So, there are situations in which it might be justifiable, frankly, as a matter of protecting, the others. 750 players in the league and coaches and umpires, that you might have to ban a guy. But that feels kind of different, because it's more like, gambling. It's like, if you found that Jared Cosart put $1 on a baseball game, I think you're justified in banning him and never even thinking about letting him back in.
Yeah, exactly. And we should take a moment and point out that that's what Pete Rose did.
Right. I mean, Pete Rose did it repeatedly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But now
And
they're talking about letting him back in. Is my point.
oh, right, yeah. It's also, yeah. So I think even there the violence is kind of distinguishable. I'm trying to think of other things. I think we're both pretty much on a much more libertarian bent with respect to drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, I think baseball can, like, I've become more okay with PED suspensions, weirdly, in the last, say, couple of years. Um, Mainly because I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, you can make a rule. And then once you make a rule, even if it's a stupid rule, it's a rule that is meant to regulate the internal workings of the game, and so you should just follow the rule. Like, it's not hard. That's not fair, actually, because there have been a few positive tests that have maybe credibly come about through accidental, ingestion of things that were in other things, particularly on the amphetamine side.
Right.
But with those exceptions, and there should be a procedure for kind of lessening those kinds of things. If baseball says don't inject yourself with horse testosterone, even if horse testosterone doesn't actually help you hit a baseball, I think it's fair to make guys not use it.
Yeah, I think you have to do the thing that you do when, like, you're a little kid and you have, like, a piece of cake, and you're in a room full of other kids. It's like, if you can't eat that cake in front of all these other kids unless everybody gets some cake. So, you can't have horse testosterone unless everybody is using horse testosterone.
Everybody at least has to have the option.
Yeah,
And
so
if they don't want to grow, like, a mane or hooves.
that would be awesome if that was like the giveaway. Like,
Yeah, it's not that your testicles shrink; it's that you get a mane.
You just start growing a mane. It's like, oh, wait a minute, Brandon Moss.
Yeah.
Starting to look like.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I do think baseball. I mean, guys have been suspended pretty badly for drugs. There is this whole Josh Hamilton thing with his relapse. I think baseball should not be in the business at all. Now, there are reasonable things that the team, as the direct employer of the player, and as the entity that benefits from that player's performance, should be able to, act if the player is using in such a way that it affects their ability to perform, because that's kind of always true. Again, in any workplace, if you show up drunk, your employer has every right to discipline you, and that's true. That's true in context where there's a collective bargaining agreement. That's true not. Like I don't think you're never really going to hear. You'll hear arguments over how bad the discipline should be, but nobody's ever going to argue you should have let that guy work. He was just drunk. Like nobody's ever going to say that. So if guys are actually affecting their ability to work, and that includes being hungover. I mean, baseball is a hard thing to do. You don't want heavy equipment operators driving hungover either, and you don't want a guy trying to hit a baseball hungover for different reasons. There's not really a safety issue in the baseball side of things, but they can't hit a home run if they're hungover, really. Mickey Mantle probably could, but he's the exception. There's ways you can affect it without actually showing up under the influence, but I don't know that there's any justification in going after a guy who smokes marijuana after a baseball game, directly after a baseball game. The next game doesn't start for 21 hours. It's worn off. He's gonna be fine. And so I don't like that the minor leagues test for that stuff. And if the minor leagues had a union, they wouldn't be able to get away with it. The union, I think, would negotiate that the same way they have in Major League Baseball. They've resisted that kind of thing.
Jason, not to put you on the spot, but do you know anything about? Because I've heard that is in the works, that the minor leaguers are attempting to, some of them, I guess, are unionized. Do you have any information about that?
I don't have any information about that. I mean, I know that there is some talk that these lawsuits over wages, that has become, particularly in recent years, a common tactic of unions and of people trying to organize, is to file lawsuits and create issues that way and create pressure. And say, look, you can either pay these people millions of dollars in back pay, or you can settle and negotiate with the union and things like that. And then there's a lot of obstacles in baseball. There's a lot of obstacles in organizing. I've written about that. That article that I wrote for the Score a couple of years ago sadly appears to be gone along with the death of the Score. But there are a lot of difficulties to it. But I think particularly as the awareness of how poorly minor league baseball players are paid, and how poorly they're treated in general, not like abusively, but just like particularly particularly given the expectations on them to maintain their physical condition and all of that stuff, and to just up and move across the country because they got promoted or even worse, demoted. They don't have any say in whether they get to go to Florida or not. And it's not even like a trade. It's you're just still within the same employer, the same position. They just moved you from one affiliate to another, and now you have to pick up and move. So all of that stuff, and so for them to be paid the tiny amount they're paid has always been ridiculous. But in the last couple of years, it's actually starting to get some press, and I think hopefully the players are starting to realize that there are things they can do about it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen. I think it would take a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of work at a normal workplace. What few factories we have left in America. It takes a lot of work to have convince people to vote for a union. And we see that at the Volkswagen plant in Tennessee, I guess. That's a classic sort of union place, and granted it's in the South, but it took a lot of organizing, and then they lost the election. So these things happen. So it's not an easy thing.
Do you anticipate that at some point in the future that they would unionize?
I mean, I feel like it's almost inevitable. On the other hand, it should have happened if it were inevitable, it should have happened a long time ago, because major league players have been organized since the 60s. Or maybe I don't remember exactly when, but sometime in the 60s, I think. Maybe as late as the 70s. But And you would have think that you'd have thought that the minor league players would have sort of looked at that and acted by this point. And there's been almost nothing. There's been, on the other hand, there hasn't been any major large scale organizing drive that's failed. I mean, because a failed organizing drive is kind of devastating, as a matter of being able to go back into that area and say, well, let's try again, because it's like, well, look what happened last time. All these people got retaliated against. All these people got, life was shitty. We were, like, the workplace was so contentious. Everybody was arguing with each other all the time. Friendships broke up. I mean, I union lawyer, but I'm not going to pretend that it's not. It's not always this way, but it can be a very stressful thing.
Yeah.
That organizing period, and people get locked into their positions, and they get carried away sometimes with arguing with each other and things like that. And it's not the kind of place you want to go to work all the time, knowing that everybody's going to be wearing their buttons and their shirts and whatever, representing their position, and it just sort of divides everything in two. And I think in certain contexts, in a factory or whatever, you're not necessarily all in it together. I applaud the people who can really care about their jobs, when it is something that's more of a classic kind of job. And there's not lives on the line. There's not, and it's not a game, but the whole structure of how they've organized clubhouses and how they've organized things like that is, you're all in this together. Now go out and whoop that ass out there. And now you're going to divide each of those clubhouses right in two, and you're going to have people who like the guy in the opposing clubhouse who agrees with him on the union stuff better than you like your teammate who's trying to beat that other team with you.
Yeah.
So I think baseball has sort of particular issues with that. But, if they pushed minor league players so far down the pay scale and everything else that hopefully there would be less opposition than you would find in other workplaces. Hopefully somebody comes in and says, if we get a union, we can actually get decent pay, and everybody goes, okay, I'm for that. And there's like one or two random guys who just grew up like in a political environment that makes them super anti-union. But if it's one or two guys, you can deal with that. If it's half and half, that's where it gets contentious and angry and difficult, I think.
The MLB Players Association was founded in 1953. I had looked this up while you were talking, and apparently there were five previous attempts to unionize, as early as 1885 and as late as 1946. And then in 53, I guess that attempt stuck. I know this isn't a topic we really plan to talk about, but I find it fascinating. Is there? Well, let me ask you: what would you imagine to be the consequences of a minor league players union? Like what would the players achieve? What would be the downside for the team? Like in terms of not just paying extra salary, obviously, but like logistically.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd get minimum wage. I'm sure they'd get at least up to that. I don't know what their healthcare situation is. I think they'd have a decent, chance of. I mean, the problem is, you don't start with some mythical, blank slate when you're bargaining. You start with the status quo, and the status quo includes such low pay that they have to bargain from that, and the status quo includes already drug of abuse testing.
Yes.
So if you want to get rid of that, you're going to have to, you're going to have to give on something else. That's bargaining. And so I don't know. The ideal, obviously, in a first contract is lots of good stuff. Like an immediate jump in pay and and a more traditional context, like a better vacation, policy, and I mean, the big thing that you get in, any realistically any union contract is just cause. You can't be fired without just cause. And so it kind of walks back the at will, where the general regime in the U.S., and this is sort of in the minority among sort of Western countries, is that you can be fired for any reason except for certain reasons. Any reason that isn't based on your race or your sex, gender, disability, pregnancy, things like that. So it's like there's this whole universe of reasons you could be fired for, and they've carved out the few things that you can't be fired for. And Just Cause basically flips that into, here are the things that you can be fired for. And so basically every termination, they have to be able to justify it, theoretically all the way out to a neutral arbitrator. And so that is frequently a sort of subject of arbitration between a union and an employer, is was this person fired for just cause? And over sort of 80 years of labor relations, that phrase has come to take on a certain meaning. In baseball, that doesn't happen. That doesn't really exist. There's no firing for just cause. The union does not get to arbitrate, this player was too good to cut. Like, you shouldn't have cut him. You shouldn't have traded him. That was a bad trade. You didn't have just cause to make that trade. That's not the regime. But there's also, they have guaranteed contracts. So when a guy gets cut, he still gets paid. Right. So that, I think, minor leaguers don't, as far as I know, have guaranteed contracts. If you get released, and you see like waves of guys getting released every year after the draft, because guys come in and there's not room for them necessarily. There's the short season teams that don't even start up until after the draft. Right. But a couple of guys will get put onto other teams, and players get released from the minor leagues all the time. I don't think they get paid for the rest of the year after that. And so I think you might see guaranteed contracts in the minor leagues, or where that might start is guaranteed contracts for anybody at AA and above. Like, once you're promoted to AA, your contract, you get paid through the end of the year. Right. And so for the major league team, aside from the extra cost, that adds one more layer of decision making. Just like now, it's like we talked about, maybe talking about Chris Bryant later, although given how long we've gone now, we're not going to get there. Like manipulating service time, you might start thinking about, who you're going to put at AA. Now, obviously, like a prospect who is going to make the majors, you don't have any hesitation. You don't care. You're not going to release that guy mid-year. But maybe now it changes who you call up for a week at AA to fill in for an injury. Do you call up a guy who you might release later on? Do you call up a guy who's already on a guaranteed contract? Things like that. It maybe changes the calculus, which is probably a good thing for the players, because as it is, as I alluded to earlier, players just get bounced around all the time. You see these, fringe like catchers in particular, who will play at 3 or 4 affiliates throughout the course of a year, because they just go wherever there's an injury, wherever somebody, maybe there's a major league injury. Now the AAA catcher gets called up. Now you need the backup AAA catcher, and you could but both of your guys at AA aren't really ready, so you call up the 28-year-old playing at high A, and you just go have him play at AAA for a week. That sucks for that guy, So anything that maybe gives them a little more stability, is probably a decent thing for those players. So you might see negotiations on that point. Actually, how many times can you promote and demote a player in the course of a year before you have to pay them extra or put them through waivers or who knows what, whatever that might be a subject of negotiation.
Do you think that if the minor league players unionized successfully and achieved I don't even know what to call it, a minimum wage, a living wage, do you think that would have an effect on Major League Baseball player salaries? Would minor leaguers earn so much that all of a sudden the Cubs can't afford to give, I don't know, whoever 20 million and they have to give them 10 or something like, I don't know. That's a terrible example because it's not even an example. It's just rambling. But you understand what I'm asking. I hope.
Yeah, I don't. I don't think. Um, I don't think the numbers would ever necessarily be big enough. Um, it's hard to say. I mean, they also would still be. I wouldn't anticipate, for instance, them ever actually getting any kind of free agency that they don't already have. Maybe they could slightly improve their free agency in terms of getting it earlier or getting it on some different conditions than they already have.
Yeah.
Um, but like I wouldn't imagine a scenario where Chris Bryant and players of his caliber are able to get their sort of market value. Like I don't think the
Right.
draft would go anywhere, and I think they would still be locked into their teams and things like that. So I think basically it would be about. I think it would probably create a scale like exists in most workplaces, particularly unionized workplaces. There's just an amount, and you go up based on seniority and things like that. You're not bargaining, and I mean that's kind of an unusual and interesting feature. Unions are very committed to the notion of lockstep pay and uh, bargaining on that because individual bargaining is generally powerless bargaining, and that's sort of different in the baseball context because and people aren't interchangeable in the way that they are in a lot of other jobs. And more interchangeable. That's not to diminish their skills relative to mine, just like it's not to diminish a truck driver's skills relative to mine. So much as that, the 90th best prospect in the A's organization is far better than you and I are at baseball, but not, uh, 50 other guys. It might make sense to have a more traditional sort of pay scale. Um, and given that, I don't know that the numbers are necessarily going to be big enough, particularly um, to um, to really affect Major League payroll. And I think the other thing is that minor league baseball is so much not a huge moneymaker, particularly for the major league teams,
Mhm.
who are the ones that employ these players and pay these salaries. That I mean, are minor leaguers going to threaten to strike? What does a strike do? All it really does, as far as the major league team is concerned, is interfere with the development of these players. And that isn't good. They don't like to see that. But it isn't the same as shutting down production at the Boeing plant. Now you're not building airplanes, and you can't fulfill your contracts with the people who ordered those airplanes, and they're going to get pissed at
Well,
you. Negotiate. Minor League Baseball is, your affiliates are going to get pissed at you, but they're all going to get pissed at you at the same time because the whole system is on strike. There's that affiliate going to go.
no, you're right.
Also got struck.
You're right. Um, I mean, I think I don't know, but so this this sentence is going to be great. Um, but I think minor league teams must make some money. They must be. I mean, I know that, like, for instance, the Red Sox are trying to move their AAA team from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, to Providence, Rhode Island, and they're trying to get a new stadium. And I know the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, which is the AAA team of the Phillies, got a new stadium a number of years ago. I mean, there must be financial reason for these new stadiums to be built. These teams must generate revenue. They must some kind of revenue, right? I mean, they can't just be money sucks. So I imagine there would be some financial pressure, um, beyond just player development that would be generated by a minor league player strike. Um,
Yeah, I think the problem is that financial pressure is, or and the money generated belongs to the affiliate, not to the major league team. And I think there are a few team-owned affiliates out there, but for the most part, they're independent entities that are literally affiliated, with the major league team. And so what it's the major league team itself won't lose money. Um, they'll just piss off all the affiliates. The major league team is not the one profiting from hot dog sales and is not the one losing money from lack of hot dog sales. They're just um, losing that development. The minor league teams, yeah, I mean the minor league teams are completely screwed if there's no game, obviously, because they can't sell tickets and they can't sell hot dogs, and they're probably almost more screwed than in a major league strike, because at least owners can threaten replacement players and can try to convince minor leaguers to cross the picket line, because those minor leaguers aren't part of the union. They're not, or I mean, even occasional major leaguers across the picket line. And so you can put on some facsimile of the game, but like if all of the minor leagues are on strike, is a AAA team really going to be able to put on a game with like guys who are currently playing in the independent leagues? Particularly since I don't know, and some of those guys might get tempted to play in the local A ball, but you're basically going to be drawing from like your local rec leagues and stuff to if you want to, try to put on a replacement. So that particularly, I mean, given how much of the minor leagues, how much of sort of fandom or whatever visiting minor league stadiums and stuff is about seeing prospects, seeing guys who are going to be in the majors in a couple of years, seeing Mike Trout from 5 feet away because it's A ball and you can afford that ticket for $10. You'd never be able to sit that close to Angel Stadium. Are replacements even close to the same draw? And given that they're already kind of a shitty draw at the major league level, I think there's that.
well, there's an added level of complexity too. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the major league team doesn't pay all the players. They pay the ones that are on major league contracts.
No, I think they pay everybody. I think they're the employer of the entire roster.
Okay.
I don't think the minor league teams are responsible because, you think about even before you're on the 40-man roster, you're getting promoted and moved around and whatever, and that's the major league team making that call. So I'm pretty sure the major league team is the employer, and it's the major league team that's on the these tiny paychecks of these minor league players. And they're certainly paying, for instance, the signing bonus when a guy gets drafted, and they're not allowed to sign major league contracts straight out of the draft anymore. And so, but that's the major league team paying that signing bonus, and then the guy's not on the 40-man roster, doesn't have a major league contract.
I just recall the terminology, such and such a team has purchased the contract of, X player, and it made it sounds like they weren't paying the guy's salary before, and now they will.
Yeah, I feel like that's just a leftover terminology from when the minor leagues were legitimately independent. The Yankees actually negotiated with the San Francisco Seals for how much they were going to pay. Whereas now, I think that I think that's just a leftover thing because they're all affiliated, and so the minor league team doesn't have a choice. I don't even know. I wonder if the minor leagues teams get some kind of payment. You know, basically like, sorry, we took your best player. Here's some money to make up for that.
Yeah.
That would be nice of of a major league team to provide those kind of payments to their affiliates, but I don't know if they do.
So this is Wikipedia. So yes, I'm now reading Wikipedia on a podcast. It says, yeah, I'm gonna get struck by lightning. Major League Rule 56 governs the standard terms of a player development contract, which is the standard agreement of association between a minor league team and its major league affiliate. Generally, the parent major league club pays the salaries and benefits of uniformed personnel, players and coaches, and bats and balls, while the minor league club pays for in-season travel and other operational expenses. So
I guess that explains why partially. Well, yeah, and the travel is so bad because the minor league team is responsible for that stuff. Um, which is the whole innovation of the Dodgers this year. You know, taking that over and feeding the minor leaguers right and all that stuff, which means obviously they're going to pay for it.
yeah, thank Gabe Kapler
They're
for
just
that.
going to order Albuquerque or wherever Oklahoma. We've got new rules, guys. You're going to have to pay for like organic spread after the game. Yeah, we know you only took in like $50 in ticket revenue, but you still got to pay for it.
This is way out of date, so maybe you know this, but this is kind of interesting. The longest continuous link between a major league and a minor league club. Um, oh, whoops. Okay, that actually ended. I had to read the second sentence. Well, it was the Orioles and their rookie-level Appalachian League, the Bluefield Orioles. The teams were affiliated for 53 years, and then they ended after 2010. And now they're with the Phillies, I think.
But I hope they're still named the Orioles.
You would hope so. We're not giving up the name. Yeah.
Have you seen Ruben Amaro? We're not associating ourselves with those Phillies. Sorry. Plus, they want to use the bird. The bird is cool. The bird is way cooler than the Phillies P. It's just a P.
Yeah, it's not that exciting. It's surrounded by kind of a light purple, which is not my favorite color.
Yeah, nobody likes P.
I'm just gonna sit here and giggle because you said P.
So where are we? Where did we land here?
Where are we on time? How long have we been rambling for?
About an hour, I would say.
All right. You want to quickly jump over to getting in trouble with?
Oh yeah, let's get in trouble.
Okay, so we'll do that, and then we'll call it a day.
You have the bolt cutters.
Yeah. So
That's
here's the. So last year, as I believe everyone knows, the Cardinals. I don't know if you call him a prospect or not. They called him up. He was a major leaguer at that point. Oscar Taveras was killed in a car crash after the season ended while driving drunk, and was a very made even more tragic by his 18-year-old girlfriend who was with him, who was also killed. And so the Cardinals are having memorial patches affixed to their jerseys. They say OT, Oscar Taveras, on the sleeve. Now, there's two ways to look at this, really. One is that Taveras was a Cardinal, and he died tragically, and the Cardinals are upset, and they're choosing to honor his memory. And the other is that he is a stupid idiot who drove drunk and killed not only himself but also someone else, and is not therefore worthy of being commemorated in such a way. There's probably other ways to look at this. I don't mean to Uh,
Those are
shoehorn
the only
one
two,
together.
and that's it. No
Yeah,
more conversation.
that's it. Done. What do you say? One or two, and then just turn it off. What do you think, Jason? Where do you fall in the spectrum of this?
I mean, without hoping that it's not just vamping. I, I I would start with the premise that if he was the only one who died, or even if he was the only one who was injured, like if
Yeah.
it was he crashed into a tree and he killed himself and that's it, I would be completely okay with it. Um, because people die doing stupid stuff all the time. People kill themselves. We don't, and I mean, I'm not to imply that that's a stupid thing. Like, it takes a lot to kill yourself. And I don't think that someone who dies either stupidly or intentionally should not be. It's a tragedy even if they should not have done it. Um, and but the complication of this person who was not driving, was not beyond, like, ideally she would not have gotten in the car, but it'd be kind of silly and bad to blame her. You're just blaming the victim. I'm not gonna do that. And that is sort of where the complication comes in, is the question of, does this disrespect her and her family, to realize him the same way you do anyone else who died. And I think in the end, I come down on no, basically because even literal intentional murderers, um, like, we don't expect their loved ones not to memorialize them. We don't deny them entrance into burial grounds, and we don't, uh, or we shouldn't, I guess, in my opinion. Maybe some people do, but we don't, spit on them at the funeral, because regardless of how many people they killed, that was still someone, whose mother raised that person and loved that person, however sort of badly that person may have turned out. And in the public dimension, add something to this, and so maybe we should say, well, they can mourn him, but they should do it in private. And in fact, now I've talked myself into that.
Yeah.
This is different from having a funeral. This is different having a memorial corner in your home. This is different from just generally grieving. This is public grieving, and maybe that is inappropriate.
That's kind of how I feel, and I kind of wish I didn't feel that way.
Yeah,
I kind of like to feel like this is a nice and appropriate and touching thing to do. And I think had his girlfriend not been killed in the car crash, and it was just him driving drunk, which is still a stupid thing to do, um, and him dying in an accident, that would be, for some reason, somehow it would be better, or more, it would be more appropriate to, well, obviously be better because she wouldn't be dead too, um, but it would be a more appropriate. Um, but yeah, the Cardinals are not, his loved ones, um, and they were his employer, and that's not to say that there's not a relationship there, or not to say that there's not a meaningful relationship there. But it is different, like you pointed out. It's not Tavares' parents mourning. It's not them wearing something on their shirt or setting something up in their house, or however they choose to deal with that. Um, yeah, it seems. I don't know. The only way I can think about, the only way I can think to make it okay would be if the team contacted her parents and said, "How do you feel about this?" And they said, "We feel fine about it." And I don't know how the team would publicize that. I mean, maybe they did do that. Maybe they followed that step, and and they don't want to issue a press release or something like that following that.
Yeah, you kind of have to. That kind of has to be a defensive thing, right? I mean, you just do it. People call you on it,
Yeah,
and then at that point you say, well, look, we asked.
right,
um,
right.
Now, I mean, I think you'd still get pushback. I think you'd still get, you know, really you're going to make them say no to you. And that's probably a fair point, because people call up and say we want to memorialize a person. We want to have his teammates, be able to wear, and they knew this friend, this teammate, this coworker, um, and you're going to be in the position to be the asshole, basically,
Right.
and that's an unfair position to put them into.
Jason, how would you feel about a player on the Cardinals refusing to wear the patch?
Um, I think it. Well, I think it might depend on their reasons. Um, I think it could be like if it's um, maybe someone had a loved one killed by a drunk driver.
Yep, that's wonderful thing.
And they say, I'm not, this is bullshit. I am not going to be part of this. It'd be hard to fault them for that.
Yeah, it would.
And frankly, even if not, I think this is disrespectful to her. I didn't know all. I don't know. But I find this disrespectful. And if they're like, I don't know, there's almost like a bravery there of standing up and saying that it would probably be an unpopular opinion in the clubhouse. I think I would be willing to kind of, I don't know, what does my support matter? But to the extent my support, matters to that person, like I think I would be kind of willing to support that kind of action just on those grounds. Now, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's a reason that I would, if it came out like I'm not doing this because, and is there some reason they would say that would make me be like, well, that's a shitty reason. Um, I don't know if there is one. I don't know if there's a realistic thing that someone would say and risk, the wrath of mates potentially. That would actually be a shitty reason. I mean, those are the two reasons I can think of. There's something personal here, or I
Yeah.
find this disrespectful. And both of those I think are perfectly defensible reasons. Now they might get fined by the team for not wearing uniform regulations, but I would donate to that Kickstarter to pay that fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Assuming it's not a millionaire, like a
I don't
minimum
have any.
salary guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with everything you said. Um, I think it's a little unfortunate that they are doing this. I guess because it does feel disrespectful in that way, and I don't know. Maybe if there was a way for them to, I don't know, donate some money to some worthy cause that would help stop this kind of thing from happening. I don't know. Um,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and it's also different. I feel like it's worth noting. It's also different from you know a generic notion that he's like a bad guy or whatever.
Right.
It's not like uh, player teams can't remember um, the death of a teammate or memorialize the death of a teammate because it turned out that that player, let's say something bad, was also um, a, a domestic abuser. You know,
Mhm.
um, like if Adrian Peterson died, for instance,
Mhm.
um, I don't think it disrespectful to remember him, because you had sort of memories of him and you played with him and you were friends with him and blah blah blah, just because he did this awful thing. But this is a case where he died doing the thing that killed the other this isn't just he's generically bad. The reason we need to do this memorial is because he did this thing that hurt someone else.
Right.
And so it's a different. It's not like bad people shouldn't have. Nobody would get a patch. Only I don't know who's the best human being in baseball.
Steve Garvey.
Only Steve Garvey would get a patch on on those grounds, and I don't think that's right. I mean, I think people are sort of full human beings and have good and bad and everything else, and I don't think it's wrong to take people, even if on balance they were bad.
I just actually just finished reading The Psychopath Test by John Ronson, and he talks about how people shouldn't be defined by their maddest edges, which is his terminology, not mine. And I say that because I think it sounds good. But it's hard in a way not to define Tavares on this one unfortunate event, because it was so impactful. That it ended his life and the life of someone else. But that I think it is true that he was, I don't know how old he was, 20, 19, 21.
Yeah, I think he might have been 20, 21, maybe as old as 22. But
so he had 2 decades plus of presumably being a positive person and being loved by a lot of people and having friends and all these other things that you get in your life. And so it's okay, I think, to remember those as well, and even okay for people close to him to dwell on that, as opposed to this one thing. But it's very difficult from a public standpoint, I think, to set up a memorial for a person who killed somebody.
Yeah. Well, particularly since it's like if they were proposing to have a pregame ceremony one day this year, maybe you time it with the anniversary of his, maybe late in the year, you time it with the anniversary of his call up, or his debut or whatever, and you say this is going to be Oscar Tavares Day, and we're going to remember our sort of friend and loved one. And you do want to make it a public thing for whatever reason. I mean, obviously they do want to make it a public thing because they're wearing a patch. They don't just have, it's not like just his locker is empty in the clubhouse or whatever. They could do that and it would never be a public thing. Obviously they want a public thing, so let's assume that they did do a day like that. That would be better, because at least then it's just over. It ended. Are they wearing this patch like all year, every single game?
It doesn't say it on the article that I have, but
I feel like that's kind of often what happens with these patches. Like a beloved broadcaster dies, and they put a microphone on the uniform. They play with that like all year. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case here. I mean, it's also that does change it. Like if this is a one game, if this is like an opening day thing, and then they're taking the probably fine. It's more like every single day this year. If his fiance or girlfriend, I don't remember what she was, if their family are Cardinals fans and they can tune in, or some friend is a Cardinals fan and they tune in, they're going to see it no matter what, all year, every day.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a tweet that I have from Jennifer Langosch, Langosch. She is a Cardinals reporter for MLB.com, and her wording is, OT memorial patches have been affixed to St. Louis Cardinals regular season jerseys. and she has a picture of them. So
Certainly makes it sound.
yeah, it sort of sounds like they're permanent, but I don't. It's not entirely clear. So
Yeah.
um, yeah. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, thanks for that fun topic, Matt.
Yay! Love it. I just got a tweet from somebody telling me that my article that I wrote about the Buffalo Sabres today was horrible. So that's nice.
Buffalo. That's not.
What?
That's not a team. Why are you making up teams?
It's hockey. They're tanking. And
It's not a sport. Why are you making up sports?
Yeah, I'm making up sports. I'm sorry.
Should have wrote about the U.S. men's national team. I heard they did something. I heard some people angry about that. I don't know what that was about, though.
I don't know. And apparently there's someone on the A's who looks a lot like the lead singer of Radiohead. Tyler Clippard is on the A's?
Oh yeah. He got after the A's got Escobar from the Rays in the Zobrist trade.
Yeah.
And then they flipped him to the Nationals for Clippard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It turned out, it turned out to be a good idea because hurt. So if they didn't have Clippard, they'd have Eric O'Flaherty closing, which is fine. He's good, but he's also as likely as anybody in the league to get hurt. So then they'd be down to I don't know, Jesse Chavez closing. I'm not even sure off the top of my head. I could look at beanball.org and find out.
That's a weird site. Have you ever read that site?
Yeah, it is odd. He doesn't really update very often, and I don't know. There's this whole new thing with these permanent pages, and that seems to be where all of his time goes. I don't really know. It's kind of I'd rather just read Athletics Nation and get all my shit from there.
All right, I think we're done.
Now that we're talking shit about random baseballs.
That's right. We have me quoting Wikipedia on a podcast, and you going after other.
I really shouldn't talk about blogs. They're just bloggers. They're not doing anybody any harm. Stupid bloggers are awful.
They are terrible. We love bloggers. Okay, I've just been told my mother-in-law in the next room needs me to shut the hell up. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I will. Yes. There's no fart noise. All right, so that's the close of the podcast then.
Yeah, that'll do it.
All right. See you later, Matt.
Bye, Jason.